the production of soap right here in our OECS, including in Dominica and St. Lucia. And the hope is that those products will now be purchased interregionally. Other things that I'm not sure how much they apply here, like gummed adhesive paper and poster board. I know that a lot of students doing their science projects and so on use them, but I'm not sure how much they're used otherwise. But the tariff there has gone down. There is issue related to wires, insulated copper conductors of particular sizes. The tariff has gone down there as well, which would make electrical wiring, would make it cheaper, but it would make it cheaper from external sources. That is the nature of what we're doing, Madam Speaker. As I indicated, our own flour mill, quite frankly, would not survive without the protection of the common external tariff. And repeatedly, successive foreign ministers, I had foreign ministers and ministers of trade, have had to go to CARICOM to extend. I don't know if the current Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs has yet engaged in this exercise, because I don't know the last time that it was done. I know it was done under Sir Louis Straker, and when I briefly held the portfolio, I had to do it as well, to extend the protections of the common external tariff on our flour industry. You haven't done it yet? Oh, it's a fun experience, because there are some countries within the region that would prefer to buy their flour from the United States or from South America. Yes, and because the Article 164, which I referred to when I was quoting various sections of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, Article 164, which is called the Promotion of Industrial Development, which says that upon application by a less developed country, which are essentially the OECS countries and Belize, quoted may, if necessary, in order to promote the development of an industry in any of these states, authorize such states to suspend community origin treatment to any description of imports eligible thereunder on grounds of production in one or more of these countries. And we have been doing that in successive periods to ensure that the products of the Eastern Caribbean group of companies here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines remains competitive with products available externally. So, Madam Speaker, what we're doing today is not something that is St. Vincent specific, St. Vincent and the Grenadines specific. It is a regional adjustment to the common external tariff and the regional adjustment to our excise and customs arrangements, intended in the wisdom of the Council for Trade and Economic Development to promote and buttress the development of industry within CARICOM, and additionally to create further categories of products to keep us up to date with technological changes in trade and production globally. That's what we're here today to discuss, Madam Speaker, and I'd be happy to, in wrap up, answer any additional questions that colleagues may have. And on the customs front, specifically what we're doing with automobiles, I think that merits a separate discussion. So I won't, although this changes the headings for hybrid vehicles, electrical vehicles, and other vehicles, I don't want to cloud this discussion too much at this point. I'll deal with the automobile part when I'm talking about the next bill, which is the customs amendment. I'm obliged, Madam Speaker.
For the debate, I recognize the honorable member for East Kingstown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to maybe follow in the footsteps of the Honorable Minister of Finance and probably reserve my comments or contribution to the debate for after he has completed presentation on the other bill and the resolution, which, as he quite rightly pointed out, they're inextricably linked. So I just wanted to give that indication that maybe after his presentation on the customs bill, I will, nothing contentious. My contribution is not going to be contentious. Obviously, we recognize the importance of this, of these bills. So, but I just wanted the opportunity to maybe, highlight some issues, make one or two recommendations along those lines. So, I crave your indulgence in that regard. Thanks.
For the debate, recognize the member for Central Kingstown.
Madam Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to this very, and I say very, very important piece of legislation. Like my colleague, member for East Kingston, said a while ago, we are not here now in the area of controversy. But unlike him, I make these early remarks such that the Honorable Minister of Finance, as he continues his presentation this morning, may incorporate them into his conversation and provide some of, not so much clarity, but ongoing education as to where we are as developing societies. Oftentimes, Madam Speaker, when legislation comes before this Honorable House, we sometimes address the surface issues, sometimes too because it is the easier way. This is a word I used to use, but I now understand it's in the dictionary, to conversate with our peoples on important areas of development. And sometimes we do that as well by avoiding getting back to not semantics, but some of the deeper economic underpinnings and conversation that should take place in guiding how we go forward with our own development strategies. Today, as we listened to the carefully presented arguments of the Honorable, and it's not even so much arguments, but expose by the Honorable Minister of Finance on the interconnections between our sub-region and the international community, we are not only reminded that we continue to live in a rules-driven world, and it's not that in this case the rules are inimical to our own advancement, but it is a reminder that as a people, in our ongoing pursuit for national development, we must not lose sight of separating the trees from the forest. And we are, in a sense, Madam Speaker, revisiting some age-old, new-old thinking, discussions and conversations on public policy matters that are still not completed. So in a real sense, this is a very profound discussion that speaks to pillars and principles of economic development, which, if we don't get it right, can leave us in limbo for a much longer time than we should have to. For example, Madam Speaker, when we listened to the Honorable Minister of Finance speak this morning, there are times he used the reference, and many times he used the reference, we should this and we should that and we should the other. And I was tempted at one time to ask him, who is we? Because it is a relevant question. But most times when he spoke and referenced that we should, he was speaking about the nation state of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And perhaps in fairness to him, the we and reference to the nation state correctly speaks to the regulatory and conventional and trade responsibility that we have as government. But I highlight the we, Madam Speaker, as a way of reminding us as public policymakers, and in particular this Honorable House, that on trade issues, Honorable Minister of Finance, we must never, and the Honorable Minister of Trade present, we must never, ever, ever lose sight of the fact that it is firms, businesses that trade, not countries, not governments. And if we're not careful, we can lose sight of that and become very bureaucratic, administratively driven, intellectually inspired and motivated, and our peoples are still left behind, largely because the correct focus is not identified and addressed. So that in this very important subject matter of harmonization, we are also inculcating the old discussion of what kinds of regimes must be in place for what we used to call then our infant industries. That's what they were 30 and 40 years ago. And they were surrounded by a lot of debate as to how much protection must be provided for these so-called infant industries, and at what stages do they grow up. And inherent in that discussion, Madam Speaker, was also the balance of interests between firms, business and enterprise that we want to see and grow up, and consumer interests. Consumer interests as to quality of products and services, consumer interests as respect to price and consistency. And I add this, Madam Speaker, the extent to which we relegate or force consumers or our societies to substandard products and or services. And so that became an additional responsibility for governments to make sure that to the extent that we are providing you with harmonization and protection from the outside world, we still have to make sure that you're offering goods and quality of a kind that does not compromise the right of our peoples and our consumers to best practices and best services that are provided elsewhere. You know, a classic case the Minister of Finance this morning used many times, seems to have a sweet tooth, the condensed milk experience. Reminds me of my school, my boyhood days when you will steal a small tin of condensed milk and punch it and suck it out and you go back. I know the speaker did that too, so we are at one on that matter. It's a tempting product. But, Madam Speaker, the modern housewife who wants a fridge, a stove, a washing machine, an electric appliance, does not for one single moment think and or confine themselves to what's available at Singer or OT or any of the other business houses in Kingstown. They are at the point in time in which their thought patterns are global in vision. So they're thinking about what's at Home Depot or some other place in Brooklyn. And there are times when they can actually get that item to the doorsteps faster than if they relied on the domestic service. No disrespect for our local business houses. But what we are trying in 2022, perhaps with some justification, is to say and or remind our own communities to get your house in order. And we can look around and see how that is panning out, you know. There are a lot of businesses on the ground here that were giants of yesteryear that are barely holding on now, and shells only, because lots of people, notwithstanding other tax regimes, can still, through the logistics and other resources, compete effectively with some of the protections that are here domestically and provide good quality and services. So, in the infant industry argument, Madam Speaker, there's built in the subject of how we go forward as a CARICOM region. Do we rely ad infinitum on an import substitution model? Because that is what it is, you know. When justifiably and rightly we continue on Article X, Y, and Z, give protection to the flour mills or to our galvanized factory or to our rum distillery to some extent. Although in fairness to St. Vincent distillers, they have been able to compete globally and win prices internationally, but that's the way to go. But one can equally argue that as we are in these substantive debates on import substitution models and protections and harmonizations, some of our local businesses that have had protection should have gone further on value-added activity. The very flour mills that we spoke about, and this conversation came up between myself, for example, Dr. Jules Ferdinand when he was active in the New Democratic Party. How much work, for example, have they done with our Madam Minister of Trade, with our local producers of ginger and other things that we could produce some of the range of flour and local value-added products down there, or with our root factory in carrying forward our root as a flour with various components of protected flour and indigenous produced flour and so on and so forth, and create niche markets. Very important. You see, the minister this morning, in a, not careless, but by way of example, by the way, comment spoke to soap, for example. That soap is not soap anymore. And he referred, I don't know if, excuse me if I said you did, but he didn't, referred to the Dominica experience. But Dominica is a very classic case of what I'm talking about. DCP, Dominica Coconut Products, for one time, produced all of the soap products that they want, and they could satisfy all of Dominica and much of the Caribbean. And it was so easy to become comfortable with that. Being big fishes in small ponds, swimming around in the CARICOM market, only to realize that they would be much better off if they became global in image, mission, vision, and export strategy by aligning with Lever Brothers, so that DCP products became on every cruise ship, in every bathroom, and the marketplace of the eastern seaboard of the United Kingdom, and created far greater opportunities and development and advancement for the people than they had confined themselves to the region. Same thing in Barbados, with Iron Seal Ramen coming out of Bridgetown. When they moved out from the protection of a shallow region, a small region, and aligned themselves with Malibu and became an international rum on the world market. The same considerations are important, and I speak it out over and over, or Erica McIntosh, Erica's brand. Big fishes in small pond, disappearing, yes. But what are the chances of these small companies here having the proper alignment and global visions and aligning with an international pepper and sauce and spices and condiments brand and goes international? So all I'm simply saying, while we're talking about the harmonization factor that's important, we can't lose sight of the opportunity, Madam Speaker, that it speaks to the fact that we, by way of government policy, have to be consistently looking not just at the original import substitution baby companies, but what more we can do for the small and medium enterprises who, with a little help, can say to hell with CARICOM and its harmonization. I want to be a small fish in a big pond. I am going global. Because those issues are germane to whether we swim or float, in St. Vincent and in CARICOM, or whether we continue persistently on a dependency policy. You may ask, why so, Madam Speaker? Why so? For the obvious logistical reasons and financial reasons. A protection of the East Caribbean flour mills, which we have to continue to do. And I'm aware of the arguments over and over how many times you are subjected to pressure by the executives and so on and so forth. But flour mill still sells all of its flour in the so-called protected CARICOM region. How does it pay for it? What does it earn? It earns soft currency, the EC dollar. Nice, good, decent currency. But how does it pay for it? It pays for it with hard currency, because it has to pay for it in Canadian dollars or US dollars. That has to be earned from our tourism dollars, Minister of Tourism if he is here, or those among us who take the less protective and less supported route to be export-driven enterprises. So we have to balance that scale. The small, dynamic companies that are not beneficiaries of harmonized laws, they too need a way to go international and to go abroad. You see, Madam Speaker, this is something that those of us who have the privilege are fairly well seized of this important balance between business, the government, and our societies. Because in the complex bill that the Minister is properly piloting before us here today, Madam Speaker, in the complex bill that is piloting before us, there are other important issues of consideration. Not just the world being a global village, but that we should not be forced to confine ourselves to regional politics and thinking. But we should at all times be persistent and consistently global in our village. Our own University of West Indies has come to this reality, It no longer can concentrate on the domestic $5-6 million CARICOM Caribbean market to provide the service students, as the Taiwans, the Wales, the European and other foreign universities become more attractive to our young bright students who say, yes, daddy, mommy, uncle, nanny went to UWI. But that is past, you know. I didn't say it because our university is an extremely good university. But you go there among young people and young children, you hear how many of them, if they have their way, want to fly. They want to be international students with the Mandarin and the this, the that student exchange. They want to go abroad. So, all that we're talking about must come with an accompanying set of conversations that while we are thinking local, we are always global. I want to repeat that. While we are thinking local, we must be always global. And that is why the logistics market is so important. Because with all of the protection that we want to give, all of the harmonization, all of the high-fangled, newfangled, and disfangled product range that we're talking about, it's the Amazons that are growing, you know. I run out of something, get on my little smartphone, and let me have a same day or next day presentation. Yes, it is true that our people are still not at this advanced stage, as let's say my daughters or my son-in-laws or my children who are living abroad. Well, they hardly leave the house to want something, because everything is there, it's on the net. It's on the phone. And within short times, we're getting there too. Thanks to our own institutions here where we can press an app and do an app. Because they don't have any obligation or loyalty to any firm. And sometimes in the presentation, the minister, he spoke about firms, and sometimes he spoke about industries. And it matters. They want to get it and get it now. And so the harmonization is good, the harmonization is important. But we have to accompany those international responsibilities to treaties, covenants, agreements with a heavy dose of our own domestic agenda of how we are propelling our own societies forward. And forward as global peoples, not confined, as important as might be, to a CARICOM diaspora. So yes, we are on board. We understand it's not a tiny step, there are giant steps in going forward. And we will lend our support to these necessary pieces of adjustments that makes us at one time regional and equally responsibly international. I can go on, because there are a lot of other attendant aspects to this bill that should be in place. You know, we had a piece of legislation was down to come to this house at one time. I think it was called business names and so on and so forth. And as I was waiting that opportunity, to deal with what is a serious, serious matter. And I raised it when we had a visitation here sometime recently with the distinguished head of the East Caribbean Central Bank. There was a time when I was a young man, vendoring, underline that, eh? I'm a product of vendoring. So to my brother, Dr. Leacock, my son, Major Leacock, soon to be a colonel, my nephews, lawyers, all of us out of the vending community. There was a time, you know, there was a time in this little Kingston yacht. When you look at the nameplate of a business house, G.W. Frank and Sons, Prescott and Sons, Hadley Brothers, family entities, Aaron Eustace and Sons, Reddock and Sons. They never bothered with the daughters, I don't know why. But I suppose by sons they meant daughters too. You know? You walk down Middle Street now, you're going to see Nichols and Sons, Cathy and Sons, and all the other sons gone. And a new set of names replaces the old billboards, nameplates that were in the town. And they are not Johns, Browns, Smith, Leacox, Hines, Redox, or whoever it is. They are new owners. Welcome, Vincent. Yes, I know. But I say that to understand and relate to how our conversations speak to the changing landscape, force of our societies. We must look inwards first, then to our CARICOM region, but never blindsiding our peoples of the importance to be of global vision, and that our strategies in this parliament must be globally aligned. Globally aligned. Because that's the only way we can escape from this poverty of mind, development, and opportunity that our young people are yearning for. I met a lot of them yesterday. My party had a wonderful expose of how the young people are thinking. And we have to sharpen our tools, recommit ourselves, and understand while we are complying, we are also rethinking and be in the vanguard of the development for generation unborn. Not be slaves of philosophies or principles that are either limiting or have outlived the usefulness. Much obliged, Madam Speaker.
For the debate, I recognize the Honorable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, honorable members. I am indeed delighted to weigh in and to offer, albeit brief comments, in my support to the bill that we are debating. And Madam Speaker, I know that it is not the sexiest topic to discuss an amendment touching on concerning excise tax, and particularly one that delves into issues touching on concerning trade. Madam Speaker, I really want to spend some time before going into what I consider to be the meat of the matter on the evolution of trade, particularly from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the Windward Islands, over recent years. When we had the well-established banana industry in the Windward Islands, our trade primarily was to the United Kingdom. And we're all well aware of the weekly shipments of bananas from the Windward Islands to the United Kingdom. Today, our trade in agricultural products is mainly to the United States of America and intra-regionally. And Madam Speaker, I am laying that as the basis to really encourage all policymakers, persons in the legal fraternity, technicians in the ministries, to spend quality time analyzing, assessing, reading, looking for your own space and your niche within the revised Treaty of Basseterre that governs the OECS and within the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which governs CARICOM. As I sat and I listened to the presenters, the debate, Madam Speaker, for persons who are listening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and particularly the producers, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over issues touched by the Honorable Minister of Finance in his excellent presentation. I'm not going to go into the issues of the HS-22 coding system, but to speak to what I want to posit as a call to action of indigenous and local producers so that we can have a holistic appreciation as to how we can benefit as producers from the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. As I said, it's not a discussion sometimes that we have enough. And Madam Speaker, I have been the victim as a regionalist in the OECS promoting intra-regional trade, particularly between St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I've been a victim of the insularity of many, because I see the sub-region and the region as one space, and that we have to move goods and services freely. Madam Speaker, today, as we discuss the issue of the amendment for the implementation of the coding system HS-22, I want for the producers here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to clearly understand that we have a very important part to play. Not presently only, but in going forward. Because we are discussing HS-22 today, but in 5 years' time, we will be discussing another coding system. And the question, Madam Speaker, that I want for producers to address, when we get there, how many more products from St. Vincent and the Grenadines would we be seeking greater protection for? In CARICOM, the Council of Ministers of Agriculture, we have crafted, carefully planned out a strategy in need of support of all stakeholders to reduce the food import bill in CARICOM by 25% by the year 2025. Very ambitious, taking into consideration we're coming out of a pandemic. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we had a recent volcanic eruptions, and the knock-on effect of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has caused significant inflation in fertilizer and other very important inputs in the agriculture sector. But it brings me back to the very important point, Madam Speaker, that we have a treaty and we have obligations, and if you do a survey throughout the region, whilst there is a cadre of exporters and manufacturers who are aware of the incentives that can be received and obtained in order to participate more meaningfully in intra-regional trade outside of that small cadre, there are many stakeholders who are not aware. And I support the call previously, Madam Speaker, for growth within the sector of indigenous producers, and the need for our local producers to become competitive, to ensure that we produce the quality that is needed, even though, as we are aware, based on our factors of production, for the most part, we are producing on these economies of scales. Madam Speaker, every year when I come to speak at the budget, as a government, as a ministry, as a minister, we are advancing the need for greater participation. We had in this country quite recently a well-structured, planned and conceived prime program. And every week in the cabinet, you're seeing more and more persons applying, moving from micro enterprises, and they're developing. But Madam Speaker, that is an excellent first step. But this is also a call for a removal of the very conservative approach that many stakeholders in the production sector that they have towards the whole issue of going to the bank and taking loans to capitalize their production to go to the next level. I listened quite carefully to the Honorable Member for Central Kingston, and I just want to add to that point that there is a critical need for us to marry the technology that we have in communication so that all stakeholders can utilize not just the social media, but spend more time intra-regionally connecting producers with consumers. Because it's one thing to say that you want to reduce the food import bill by 25% by 2025 as a region. The question is, what meaningful work is being done to connect the producers in Guyana with the consumers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the producers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines with the consumers in St. Kitts and Nevis. Madam Speaker, it was very interesting when I listened to the Honorable Minister of Finance, and he listed several commodities we're seeking protection. Production of onions. We are importing not only into St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but in the entire region. Too many things that we can grow here. And even though as a policymaker sometimes you may encourage producers to diversify the production, we have to remember that we are coming out of a period and out of an era, an epoch, whereby persons produce certain types of crops, arrowroot and bananas, and sugar at one point in time. And here's where we're really asking for young producers to be very outward thinking and to embrace many of these other commodities that we have to produce within the region in order to reduce our food import bill. Madam Speaker, this is a step in the right direction. This is a part of a original platform that we are operating on. And I hope that we will not, as stakeholders, production, see this as a discussion that should begin and end with HS 22. But as we move forward, we have to ensure that we become very activists in production and productivity in our sub-region and region. I'm obliged, Madam Speaker.
For the debate, I recognize the Honorable Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, honorable members, the bill before us today addresses immediately our incorporation into the global trading system, the rules-based system of the World Trade Organization, and the technical facilitation of that trade through the World Customs Organization, so that there can be a commonality of definitions, all the various rubrics, so that these rules-based provisions would have a commonality of application. So that is the first issue at hand, the question of the HS 2022. The second is our membership of the Caribbean community as established in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas of 2001, which I had the honor to sign on behalf of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on July the 5th, 2001 in the Bahamas. It addresses also the dimension outside of the specific harmonized trade issues, other questions in the regional integration process, in particular, the evolution of the Caribbean single market and economy, which goes beyond trade itself. The debate clearly touches and concerns, too, the wider issue of the path to economic development, which was raised by the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, but which was the focus of the discussion of the Honorable Member for Central Kingston. It is important, therefore, Madam Speaker, in a consideration of all these issues, we begin with certain factual matrices. We are addressing here with HS 22 and the application of the common external tariff and the variations, matters relating to visible trade. The economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines currently, in terms of its production of goods and services, is close to 80% or thereabouts in services. And in terms of its visible external trade, 80% of its visible external trade is intra-regional. That is to say, within the context of CARICOM. So the exercise in which we are involved here is not exclusively about all dimensions of the economy, but a particular portion of the economy which is vital. And in terms of visible trade, trade in goods, not trade in services, 80% is within the CARICOM region. And the bulk of our export trade in the region, 60% or thereabout, is within the OECS. These are facts we must keep in our focus. Now, Madam Speaker, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has embarked upon a quest to build a modern, competitive, many-sided, that is to say, highly diversified, post-colonial economy which is at once national, regional, and global. And two dimensions of that, the regional and the global, have come into play this morning in what is a technical bill. And I appreciate that the members of the opposition have no quarrel with these issues, because the fact of the matter is this: we are not going to be able to survive and thrive without being incorporated into a trading system globally for which there are rules. We may debate whether those rules are sufficiently fair, and I can affirm that they are insufficiently fair. Indeed, in some respects, unfair. But it is important both for the trade in goods and the trade in services that we... Madam Speaker, you can't jump off the world. There are some persons, however, who think that we can avoid being within CARICOM or within the single market and economy. In fact, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of CARICOM, but the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is not part of the single market and economy. It's not part of the economic integration dimensions of CARICOM. Because the economy of the Bahamas is largely one dealing with services, and the tourism services, and they do not see that there would be any upside for them in being part of the single market and economy. Indeed, Madam Speaker, because it involves certain issues touching and concerning the movement a free movement of labor, not complete free movement of labor, but a quest towards that, as articulated in Article 46 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, that Bahamas doesn't want to have anything to do with that. In the case of Haiti, there has been some confusion as to whether Haiti had signed on towards the single market and economy enterprise. But the analysis, the legal analysis, is that it did not. How have we arrived at this position? Madam Speaker, in the 1950s, we came towards a particular juncture where it was agreed that there would be a federation of the West Indies. Didn't include Guyana, it didn't include Belize, it didn't include Suriname, it didn't include the Bahamas. Jamaica down to Trinidad, that archipelago. The federation fell apart in 1961, 1962. But the longing for a union endured for two sets of reasons. Factors which induce us to union and factors which predispose us to union. The factors which predispose us to a form of integration, Madam Speaker, are those of our common history, our actual circumstances of small size, our geographical propinquity, which is a beautiful old word, geographical closeness. Similar sets of governance arrangements, demography, pretty much the same. But while those things which predispose us may touch our heartstrings, those which induce us are connected to our head, and we have to be very much looking at our material interests. And the design of CARICOM first in 1973 was not for a single market and economy, but for trade arising out of CARIFTA of 1968, but to advance CARIFTA to that of a customs union. CARIFTA was a free trade area because it was felt that these countries are so small, and while we are building services, we have to look at our trade in goods. And this trade in goods, Madam Speaker, it was felt that, look, we had to have free trade arrangements between each other, at least to sell each other things that we produce, to enlarge the market, so to speak. Of course, the limitation of a free trade area is simply this. St. Vincent and the Grenadines will have a free trade area with Antigua and Dominica and Jamaica and Trinidad and the like. But in relation to third countries, you have different tariffs. So that if you have a free trade area with, say, Jamaica, But Jamaica's external tariff in relation to third countries is much less than yours. There's no commonality. It would undermine clearly the efficacy of your free trade area, Madam Speaker. So that is why the occasion arose to have a customs union in seeking to establish a common external tariff to provide protection, and that has been consolidated and expanded upon in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas and the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. That is to say, we set up a common set of tariffs externally. Now, I was chairman of the OECS authority when the CARICOM heads of government took a number of steps towards a single market and economy. And we did not sign on right away because we wanted to be assured of certain matters. You see, you take the production of goods, manufactured commodities. An important ingredient in this is energy. And the price of energy in Trinidad and Tobago is far cheaper than the price of energy anywhere else in the Caribbean. We will see the changes taking place in Guyana now, and of course, some extent in Suriname. And the truth is this, is that we had done a study in the OECS, and which showed the challenges which the manufacturing sector faced because of cheap energy in Trinidad. And it's very difficult to produce in any of these countries commodities which Trinidad producing, to compete with them because of the price of energy ex refinery. Of course, that's one of the reasons why a number of Jamaican firms have relocated production apparatuses into Trinidad. But you need to have some compensating swings if you may lose some things on the roundabout. And the treaty, the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, puts in place a regime for disadvantaged, less developed countries and disadvantaged countries and regions. In fact, Chapter 7, the entire Chapter 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas contains a number of provisions. There are in fact 3 parts to this. The scope of the application in Part 1 states, Article 142.1, sorry, the provisions of this chapter shall have the effect of the purpose of establishing a regime for disadvantaged countries, regions, or sectors within the framework of the treaty, as well as a special regime for less developed countries, in order to enhance their prospects for successful competition within the community and redress the extent possible any negative impact of the establishment of the CSME. And in Part 1, there's several various different provisions. Part 2 establishes a regime for disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors. And Part 3, a special regime for less developed countries like St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in that Part 3, well, if I may, yes, I'll stay with the trade here and then go to Part 3 and I'll come back to Part 2. In Part 3, Article 164, which reads, 1. Upon application made in that behalf by the less developed countries, COTED, that is the Council of Ministers of Trade and Economic Development, may, if necessary, as a temporary measure in order to promote the development of an industry in any of these states, authorize such states to suspend community origin treatment to any description of imports eligible therefore on grounds of production in one or more of the less developed countries. Well, the less developed countries are defined as the Honorable Minister of Finance pointed out, the OECS countries and Belize. And when Haiti, if Haiti comes within the whole ambit, they will have a special regime also. But it is important to note, Article 164.3 says this: the grant of authorization pursuant to the paragraph 1 of this article, which I just read, shall be by means of a decision supported by the affirmative votes of all the less developed countries and at least 2 of the more developed countries. And this is where you do have challenges. And that is what the Minister of Finance is talking about in relation to flour and animal feed. Over the past 21 years plus, I've had on several occasions with Foreign Minister, Minister of Foreign Trade, and the technical persons, and a former member of this Honorable House, Senator Jules Ferdinand, who was at one time Chief Executive Officer of the Eastern Caribbean Group of Companies down at Camden Park, would tell you of at least one particular epic battle of which he had knowledge, because I had him come to the heads of government meeting as an advisor so that he can see how this thing is played out. And since then, we have had to do it again. On the last occasion, shortly after the new government in Barbados had come to office, it was fortuitous that we got Guyana and Suriname to agree with us. Otherwise, there would have been unemployment down at Camden Park at the flour mill. There would have been problems with Vinlec with the extent of electricity consumption. That's how these things are connected in our small country, you know. But to get all the OECS countries also difficult. Let the record show that in my time as Prime Minister, other than the occasion when Patrick Manning was Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And I must speak the truth in this Parliament. Trinidad and Tobago has always opposed the extension of Article 164 in relation protection to our flower and field. This is a Trinidad and Tobago from which we import 160 million plus. We look at the data, maybe 170 now. And we export $20 million to them. And at one time, even when we export the $20 million, we had a problem getting foreign exchange, and we had to set up particular regimes. Persons may be listening and they may say, well, why we don't abandon CARICOM? But you can't abandon it because you're part of this process, because it's a multiplicity of trade-offs. And without CARICOM and the protection without Article 164, there's that, there's water, which we also sell. There are a couple of products. But you may think also it is easy to get Article 164 with the OECS countries. There's at least one OECS country where they don't produce flour, but the people who import flour from that country exercise enormous influence. Doesn't matter which party is in power. And they would love to get quote-unquote cheaper Trinidad flour. I am not mentioning a country. You know, I'm an experienced man, and I know when I could call country and when I should not call country. You don't have some of the responsibilities I have. But you appreciate my point. Fine. No. You know the last time what we had to do? In fact, for two countries, we had to do it. To allow them importation of the packaged flour. No, the packaged flour from outside of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, outside of the OECS, because Grenada also has a plant, a factory, but Grenada doesn't produce, and I don't think they would mind me saying this, our quality and their cost is more. For instance, to move from where you are, the transportation cost to take it to the pier in Grenada is quite expensive. Whereas for us, we have a port right there, and they just unload the raw materials and they load the finished product. Because where the bread and butter is in the 100-pound sack of flour, the baker's flour. And we produce an excellent flour down at the flour mill. The quality is very good. Now, so the trade-offs, you take for instance, the Caribbean, the movement which we have, some movement in freedom of movement of persons, St. Vincent and the Grenadines benefits. Because we have skills which are being made available across the region. Of course, we import skills from the region too, but the record will show that more of our people go and work elsewhere. An important compensating mechanism under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas is what is called the Development Fund, Article 158. It begins by saying this: there is hereby established a development fund for the purpose of providing financial or technical assistance to disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors. And we are a disadvantaged country. There are disadvantaged regions and sectors across. And the way it is, the treaty states it, there is hereby established. So it took some years to establish the fund, and every CARICOM meeting I would repeat this. There is hereby established a development fund for the purpose of providing financial or technical assistance to disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors. And then it was capitalized. It was capitalized with about 120 million US dollars in the first cycle of capitalization. Trinidad and Tobago, under Patrick Manning, had put the bulk of the money, single largest sum. This is a treaty obligation. Jamaica had put money in the first cycle and said that they would not ask for any money during the first cycle. Barbados said that they will put, but they wouldn't ask for any money. This is a very good, the CARICOM Development Fund, which is established there, Madam Speaker. And the Ministry of Finance will tell you, the way the rules are, and I always insist we pay our subscription on time. Subscription is $2 million. We can get back $2 million immediately as a grant. Plus we can get loans, soft loans. But the second cycle is unlikely to be anything more than 60% of the first cycle. So that we still get some resources there. We got some resources from it to help with the airport. We got some resources from it to help with it's quite a struggle because the resources are very tight for the CARICOM Development Fund, with the hotel out at Diamond, one in which the state is involved. So the issue raised by the Honorable Member for Central Kingston is quite correct. Somebody who wants to buy, there are many persons, particularly middle-income persons, who want to buy products, including appliances. They will simply import the appliances because they feel that Westinghouse or whatever it is, whatever the brand is, might be a superior one than what you can get from Trinidad or Jamaica, or what you may get assembled here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, whether from CD Vera or whether you're buying it through OT or whatever, as he pointed out. But that, Madam Speaker, still remains for you. That option still remains for you. But what you will do then, you will pay the common external tariff. And that is, I hope, Madam Speaker, that I put the thing in a sufficiently broad context, but zero in as to what we are about. Now, how many more minutes do I have remaining, Madam Speaker? I don't want to take all the time.
You have 12 minutes remaining.
Okay, fine, thanks. Madam Speaker, what we have to do beyond the visible trade and all the various trade outs which we talk about is to look for important niche areas to be properly supported of quality. I think we are all agreed on both sides of the house. We're not going to have the volumes. But we should be able to enhance our trade regionally, and we can get particular niche markets, especially in diaspora communities, not Vincentian diaspora, but Caribbean diaspora, in which there's a significant market in several different places, and for other persons too. But this is where the airport in Canouan and the jet airport in Canouan and the international airport in St. Vincent and Grenadines comes in, what they come in. Madam Speaker, you can sell your products outside, but you can bring people here and let them consume your products. Whether it is agricultural products or agro-processing products, and the more of them we bring, we have to feed them. And that is why a big conversation we had with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries at some internal budget discussions last week with all the technical people. What are you doing immediately to identify the farmers and local agro-producers, farmers, fisher folk, who are going to sell, for instance, to sandals? Where sandals is coming, unless they have delays for one reason or the other, maybe December next year they'll open. That's part of their target period. That's their target date. Because if you wait, Madam Speaker, and I want to make this point here, because I'm not talking just history and the present, I'm talking now the future. If you wait until June, July this year, sandals would already have gone and made arrangements with a big producer, because there are 5 global companies in the area of agriculture, for instance, which produce 80% of the world's trade in agricultural products. And they would lock in there for a 3-year contract. And then what you will get is stuff at the margins. So we have serious work to do, not only in producing to go further in the region and globally, but to bring people here who will consume our products. And then, of course, Madam Speaker, there is the vital area of entertainment and cultural products, which is a growing area. And that is why it is important for us to have secured in Europe, for example, the Schengen visa waiver, and that's why I continue to work with the Canadian Prime Minister to see if we can get the restrictions in relation to visas for Canada removed, and that's why we, through our various governmental offices, seek to help to get entertainers their visas to go to the United States, because they earn good money. And of course, when we bring people here, we have to do that. The same thing in the field of visual arts and cinema and making of films and so on and so forth. It's an area which is growing, and which is a big area in the global economy, which we have to take advantage of. While, Madam Speaker, we train our people to do creative things on their own, in addition to fit into a global network of information technology deliverables. You know, Madam Speaker, if I may just say, in the same vein, parenthetically, as of Friday, I don't know if honorable members know this, the entity known as Clear Harbor employs, as of Friday, 811 Vincentians. Persons who don't go about town, and who don't go down the West Kingston, the lower end of the town, may not know it, but they are at the 3 stories at OT building. They have rented most of all and fixed it up of commercial, technical, and allied workers building, and the building opposite that. They've already have people on upstairs. They have 90 seats below, and if they're doing 2 shifts, that's 180 persons during the course of the day. And they are likely, before the end of this year, to pass the 1,000 mark. And they are retrofitting upstairs Russell's property up at Stony Ground for 300 seats. At that rate, they may well exceed the Mustique Company as the largest single non-state employer of labor. But it is true to say that the wages there are not at the level of the average wage, not at the level of those in Mustique. I want to say, Madam Speaker, while I'm this, please, you're listening to me, young people, get into technical trades and the culinary arts and specific areas of work, and there are lots of opportunities for training. At the moment, there is a shortage of chefs. The chefs are going onto the cruise ships. They are going to neighboring countries, and small enterprises, small hoteliers and so on, small restaurants are finding it difficult to get chefs. And some establishments are making applications for work permits for persons to come in from overseas as chefs. I am talking about the changing landscape of the way this economy and the rest in the region, how they are evolving. Madam Speaker, I just want to say this for completeness. There are 2 things, since I'm talking about the regional integration movement, which great, G-R-A-T-E, great those of us in the OECS. The first has to do with the failure and or refusal of the government of Trinidad and Tobago to pay over to the Central Bank of the Eastern Caribbean for the OECS countries $6 on an agreement which was made with the previous UNC government with Prime Minister Bissessa, Kamala Prasad Bissessa. You would have heard the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda on that and thinking of going to the Caribbean Court of Justice on this matter. There is no way the government of Trinidad and Tobago could dice it. That money is owed in relation to BICO. This is not the time for me to go through all the details, but I want to affirm that. The second thing, I'm calling from the Parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago to provide the necessary transparency and accountability and proper representation for the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Barbados in respect of a body known as the Caribbean Air Navigation Advisory Services, CANAS. For many persons, you've heard me on this before, but many persons don't know the significance of this. When the colonial government left, well, then they're preparing to leave our region. The lower airspace was essentially in the hands of a private company. Eric Williams negotiated to have it, and the countries in the region agreed for Trinidad to manage what is called the Piarco Flight Information Region, which runs from St. Kitts right down to Trinidad, and including the French agreed for the French West Indies of Martinique and Guadeloupe. It was reported in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that the collections for the flight, for the overflight, annually amount to about $100 million US. Part of that space is our space. We are not getting any money for it. We are not represented, neither is Barbados nor any of the other OECS countries. When Trinidad says, well, that's, you talk about, they don't tell you what are the receipts. They say, but they have expenses. I say, but that's fine. If you boss, let's pay our part of the expenses. But we want to know what the revenues are. They say, well, they give some computers and they help to train some people. And I just want to know how much money you're making, what are the expenses, and what is left. Let's divvy it up. If the operation is in the deficit, let us pay it. In the same way that we have the space known as ECTEL, the telecommunication space, and from which we derive revenues, we make payments, and we are in a, it provides revenues for central governments. But once I'm on my feet and there was an invitation to widen the debate by the Honorable Member for Central Kingston, I took that invitation. We are agreed on all the issues presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance. This very technical bill, but a bill of great importance, and as you notice, the bill raises many critical policy issues. And Madam Speaker, I just want to say that for persons who may wish to see the further thoughts of the government of St. Vincent Grenadines, on the eve of the 29th Intersessional Conference of the Heads of Government in Haiti, I delivered a paper on the 22nd of February 2018. It's online, entitled Some Salient Issues for Resolution in CARICOM. It came in this paper. It's a 63-page paper, came in the aftermath of the publication in March 2017 of the report of the Commission to review Jamaica's relations with CARICOM and CARIFORUM frameworks, the so-called Golden Report. And I addressed some of the issues raised by Golden. I had gone to Jamaica and appeared before that body, so too did Owen Arthur. And there are some things in the report which we agree with, St. Vincent and Grenadines agrees with, and others which we did not. And in the commentary, and because the report was going to be considered, at least initially at this intersessional meeting, I decided to put the position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines clearly on paper. And this meeting, I delivered this address before I went at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the business community and other stakeholders so that we can have a better appreciation of our role in CARICOM. There's a trade dimension, single market and economy, but there's functional cooperation in a range of matters covered by the Council of Ministers for Health and Social Development. There are security issues, and then there are the issues concerning the coordination of foreign policy. That is the menu of issues broadly that we address within CARICOM. But I remind everybody, what we are dealing with today is visible trade, which is some 20% of our export earnings. And that the bulk of our export earnings on visible trade, some 60% of it, is inside. Well, 60% of the 80%, which is really within CARICOM, 60% is within the OECS. And that's why we call for a special carve-out within CARICOM, and we're fighting for this, for the revised treaty of Bastel, establishing the OECS Economic Union. I'm obliged.
For the debate, I recognize the Honorable Member for West Kingstown. Prime Minister, I thought you were going to make it about
If my honorable friend, the Speaker has asked if I can make this a document of the House, document to which I've just referred, and I'll do so.
Yes. Next Honorable Member for West Kingstown. Ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I crave your indulgence since this is a continuation of the House meeting started some time ago to note that about a year ago at this time I was in Trinidad undergoing and recovering from an operation, and I heard of the passing of my dear friend, former Prime Minister Sir James Mitchell. That anniversary comes up this week, I believe it's tomorrow. And I just want to take this opportunity to extend to his family and well wishes in our beloved country on the passing of the father of the New Democratic Party. As chairman of the party, I wish to do so, Madam Speaker. I wish now to make my comments on the bill before us, Madam Speaker. And I wish to state firstly that I join my colleagues in recognizing that there is no choice but to support this initiative. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is not an island in the sea by itself. We are part of a regional grouping, and we must abide by these rules. What I want to speak on, though, Madam Speaker, is where we as a people must come up with innovative mechanisms for ensuring that as a country, as a people, we maximize the possibilities created by these necessary rules and regulations and tariffs, etc. I want today, Madam Speaker, to share from my own experience as someone who decided to invest my life savings in the production of wines in this country. I didn't do that by accident, Madam Speaker. I recognized, following my training, that there's a tremendous potential for us to use our fruits to add value, to produce a product that is world class. Madam Speaker, I use that experience, and I want to refer to it in some details, even though the matter of my winery is before the court, stuck for well over 14 years now, and going nowhere fast. I want to share the pitfalls, the hurdles, the nightmares of trying to do business of this kind in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Madam Speaker, St. Vincent and the Grenadines had an agro lab. And that facility provided budded entrepreneurs an opportunity to do incredible work, quality, and to get training on the production of agro products. That was closed. When I started to do my wine production, Madam Speaker, for me to get to export this product to Trinidad and Tobago, United Kingdom, and the United States, it was a very expensive and time-consuming process. I had to ship samples to Kariri in Trinidad for them to test and to certify that the product meets local and international standards. Madam Speaker, what then was obvious to me was the caliber of technical expertise in the Ministry of Agriculture. We had people here who were capable and competent, trained enough to be able to do this kind of testing, but they didn't have the facility from which to do it. That remains the situation today. If we are serious about producing for local, regional, and international markets, it's imperative that we develop the local competence to analyze, to test. Madam Speaker, let me take a look at the arrowroot industry. How many times have we heard that shipments of arrowroot from this country had to be dumped because of the poor quality? Because of the poor quality, biological and other. How many times? Madam Speaker, is it a fact that recent medical marijuana oil shipped from this country had to be rejected because of the same reason? Because they use contaminated water? Madam Speaker, in this country, we were fortunate to have an excellent irrigation scheme in an area of the country where we have the best arable lands. That scheme has disappeared. If we want to produce for the marketplace, Madam Speaker, we must be able to guarantee a steady production rate. The problem with most of the producers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I have seen it myself. They have an excellent product. They get all excited, they go to an exhibition and people like it. And they say, well, I like to get 2 container loads every 3 weeks. And they start pulling out their hair. Well, how the devil I going to do that? For us to make ourselves competitive, Madam Speaker, we have to give the assistance to our producers and the associated input people, the farmers of whatever kind. And the re-establishment of an agro lab, the re-establishment of irrigation in various parts of the country, and the establishment of industrial estates with a difference. You cannot put fledgling producers in an industrial estate where they have to pay standard rents and so forth, and have to pay the cost of electricity as it exists in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and expect them to survive. But in this day and age, Madam Speaker, the roofs of the industrial estates are quite large. And a government that really wants to see us moving to the point where we can export would find a means of using solar energy on a specialized industrial estate for fledgling agri-producers. You have to make the businesses competitive. You have to re-establish the agri-lab. That will make it possible for these people to get to. Madam Speaker, I heard the Honorable Prime Minister speaking today, 2022, about training people for the tourism industry. And I want to die. 22 years in the business, and you're just recognizing that. Madam Speaker, we have spoken here over the years. The Honorable Representative from the Southern Grenadines repeatedly asking about the school in the Grenadines that was spoken about for years, about training people for that very purpose. Where is it? Where is it? I have asked repeatedly for the community college to be producing people who can come out with an entrepreneurial spirit. Madam Speaker, for me to get into the winemaking business, it is my chemistry background that made it possible. I see in St. Vincent and the Grenadines a whole array of people producing wines of all varying qualities. And I was pleased to visit the exhibition at the Geese Shed and see the vast variety of really imaginative products that people are coming up with. But I Madam Speaker, want to challenge all of these people to understand, as nice as some of the products are, without the necessary technical support and without the necessary training to guarantee consistently high quality, those products have very limited scope. And I speak, Madam Speaker, from experience. I know what I'm talking about. We have to be targeting these kinds of producers, not just for the local market and not just for the regional market, but for the critical tourism market. The cruise ship passenger of today wants to sample the real local stuff, whether it be cuisine, what food you cook, what wine you prepare, what drinks you make, but it has to pass a standard. And unless there's a mechanism to train these people and to certify them, to give them the technical support necessary, they're not going to go much further. And this way, Madam Speaker, you know, I listened to the Minister of Agriculture talk about opportunities here. I simply want to ask, where on earth is the greenhouse for which so much money was spent to build one in Richmond Park? What has it delivered for us as a people? What is happening to such massive investment in the greenhouse in the Richmond Park area? Why aren't we benefiting from it? Great resources went into that. Dear Montreal area, yeah, where? Why when we use such grant money, our people not benefiting from it? Why? The same thing happens in agriculture, in our route. We are told year after year that the Indian government has given financing for building a modern root processing factory. Where is the factory? Why aren't we exporting our root? Why? So this bill is a necessary framework. But if we, as a people, don't do what we have to do, what's the point of the bill? We are lost. We have to understand what opportunities we have and go after them. But I'm not seeing any of this. I'm not seeing any of it. I keep saying, if you go in the Ministry of Agriculture, in the Forestry Division, excellently trained people. The Ministry of Agriculture itself is loaded with people trained in everything under the sun. There's no opportunity for them to use that expertise. What a waste. What an absolute waste. People are being shunted off to areas that has no relationship to their training. That frustrates people. But the more important thing is there are so many people who want to develop their products, who want to get the kind of assistance, but there's no mechanism for it. You don't have a lab. You don't have an opportunity to have the necessary training. The technical institutes look at people to be teachers who don't have one iota of practical experience. We say repeatedly here, budget after budget. If you really want to do technical training, and again, Madam Speaker, I speak firsthand. I was one of the guinea pigs at the Technical College at Annisvale, straight out of grammar school, in all science subjects. The teachers who came from England and started that college in conjunction with some of our locals all had industrial, practical experience in addition to their academic training. And that is what made the difference. You cannot simply take teachers, regular teachers, who have never worked a day in industry, and expect them to impart the kind of training to young minds that want to be hands-on. You cannot take just people who can't make it at an academic level and push them into technical training. Technical training requires serious academics, whether it be physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. So you have to start from the very primary school stage to encourage students to understand that, listen, a person who sits in an office is guaranteed to get a pension at the end of the day. But the person who gets his or her hands dirty in a mechanic shop could make more than any office worker if they have the right training and the right opportunity. That's where the opportunities are today. So we have to transform our society to help people to understand what technical training is about. Madam Speaker, you know, this sounds unbelievable, but at the first graduation of my life, it took place at what was a lyric cinema coming out of the technical college. When I looked at what happened there, I said the same thing to the Minister of Education then. We must stop looking only for dropouts to go into technical training. We must encourage people with the requisite level of skills in academia to be well trained and certified in all these fields of endeavors, including the service industry associated with tourism. But Madam Speaker, again, experience has shown me that a country like Singapore, 10 years at least before they move into a new direction, a new thrust, they select their brightest minds and they send them to train so that by the time they get into the execution state, they have the people to carry it out. Madam Speaker, we started talking about an international airport how many moons ago, and how that is going to impact this and impact that. Why couldn't we understand that we needed years ago to be looking at training people to fit the tourism sector and all that goes with it? Why today? Today you have the Honorable Prime Minister talking about lack of trained people. You hear about the this one is so laughable, it isn't funny. You know, our construction people can't work there because they know nothing, they know enough about using cement. My God, have mercy on us. What a country. We have some of the best people when it comes to masonry work in the Caribbean. Well established. Well established. Not certified enough, yes, but better than any of the certified ones. Because we have failed them. We have failed to provide the mechanisms to certify our craftsmen, who are the best. They go all over the world and excel. Madam Speaker, as I said in the beginning, the bill is necessary. It's requisite. And I have no problem whatsoever with it. Even though I know that in one or two areas we have to pay more. That means, however, more money in the Treasury. And what I hope would happen is that the government, even at this 99th hour, would recognize what is required to help our people to benefit from the opportunities that they create. Because with every setback, there are opportunities. And my message on this bill is very simple, Madam Speaker. I support it, but I urge us to look for the areas where, as a people, we can and must benefit from it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further debate? Further debate? Yes, I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Sergeant.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to make a contribution, and what we've all acknowledged, those persons who have spoken here today, is an important bill that is before this Honorable House. It may not be controversial, but not everything that is important creates controversy. It should create interest. And it should create, we hope, Madam Speaker, a level of debate that sheds more light than heat. I am grateful to the Honorable Minister of Finance for the fairly detailed presentation or explanation that he gave with respect to the origin of the bill, the nature of the regional institutions and the commitments that we have, and the level of freedom to act or not that is required by those obligations. They're treaty obligations. Madam Speaker, for those of us who have lived a longer time in this region, we have felt the yearning for regional identity more so than just merely regional integration. And there are institutions that have fostered that thinking within us. We know most about Caribbean cricket, of course. We have other institutions, the UWI. We have our history of immigration, migration amongst the countries in the region. I have relatives I know as a boy growing up. You're getting message from, they used to call it BG back then. And then they would receive products, whether it's a sack of sugar, a sack of rice, something to distribute amongst family members. There were many who went to Trinidad because the oil fields were there. Some went to Aruba, and so forth. And Madam Speaker, over time, we have seen on paper, at least, the institutions have been articulated and developed and championed at a higher level by ministers, prime ministers, at meetings in various parts of the Caribbean, while at the same time, at the level of the people, that sense of connection, of seeming movement towards the direction of integration is becoming more remote. How many people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines know what the CSME is? Even within the OECS, where since 2009 we have had free movement of people, how many people in our region really understand the implications of saying that you have a single market and economy, and what the opportunities it presents for the movement of capital, the opportunities for business, and in the OECS, the movement of labor. These are issues, Madam Speaker, that we have understood for quite some time since the formation of CARIFTA. Well, before that, the Prime Minister mentioned the Federation. That was an experiment that was probably doomed from the beginning, but didn't last for very long. But since then, Madam Speaker, we have heard the talk of integration in the party. The constitution of my own political party, the Democratic Party. We have hearkened to that, and we have a commitment to work towards Caribbean integration. So James Mitchell, during the time that he was in the politics of this country, worked towards CARICOM integration, Caribbean integration. Yet, I fear, Madam Speaker, more and more the people of the region are feeling less connected, more suspicious of one another. I recall when the OECS, the discussion of moving towards free movement of people. There was talk about being overrun by people coming from this country or that country to come and take away jobs and take away housing and all kinds of various things. Now I will urge the Secretariat of the OECS to produce on an annual basis a report on how the free movement of people in the OECS has functioned over the past number of years. For us to do an assessment to see to what extent that this has actually trickled down to the people who live and work in the regions, to the businesses, how they conceive their operations, as to whether this space called St. Vincent or the space called Antigua or the space called St. Lucia is all that we can feel safe and aspire towards operating within. And similarly for capital, similarly for skilled persons, or for all persons who are seeking jobs within the OECS. I say this, Madam Speaker, to, in a sense, set a backdrop, because what we do in this Honorable House from time to time, bills would come to this Parliament, either originating in the OECS or originating out of CARICOM, a model piece of legislation. But the model legislation is not just an exercise in drafting. It comes from an institutional framework that says we have these obligations, we're going to move in this direction, so let us start with the common legislation and hope that everybody else will adopt it. That makes sense. It's efficient, and it also leads to better uniformity and harmonization around the region. So the legislation comes, Madam Speaker, and we are presented essentially as the Minister himself, the Minister of Finance, said this is something that's happening in the region. We recognize that. My colleagues on this side have said, the member for West Kingstown, that we feel that this is something that we must support because we have treaty obligations. We know the implications of this particular legislation has broader than just CARICOM. It's worldwide in terms of our adherence to the common coding system and so forth, and description of goods. So when the legislation comes, Madam Speaker, we are almost asked to rubber stamp them. And I was trying to think back, of there are many, many pieces of legislation that come to this Parliament. And we've come here and we have discussed them and we've talked about the implications of for regional integration and the implications for us here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, opportunities and problems and so forth. And they come to us and we pass them. And I can't think of a single piece that has come here that has actually generated any kind of acrimonious debate, far less a vote opposing it, that originates in the OECS or in CARICOM. So the point is, Madam Speaker, if we as a parliament, the highest debating body of this land, representing the people of our country, are coming here and accepting what is essentially presented to us here and taking it as a matter of faith, that this is within the interests of our people, then I think we owe an obligation as well to the people to say, listen, let us keep them informed along the way as well as to what this institution is. Why are we a part of it? The Prime Minister talked about some of the difficulties we have at the level of trade ministers, at the level of meetings of heads of government, where you're trying to persuade one or other of those representatives there to support a measure. How much more effective that would be, Madam Speaker, if in preparation for such discussions, our people here understand the implications of it, what is at stake, and are waiting for an outcome to determine how it's going to affect their job, whether it's at ECGC or somewhere else. That is as serious as it gets when you're thinking that this could affect your livelihood, it could affect the operation of VINLEC, as was said. And yet, when these levels, these high levels of discussion, these with such important, significant impact, potentially, for our people, and the people generally are removed from them. They don't really know what is going on. They don't really even know what CARICOM is anymore. And that is a failure on the part of us all as leaders, but particularly for those leaders who are in government, who feel that somehow they can carry on the business of the people of the country without really seriously informing them. Why? Because they can't understand what's at stake. If you're going to lose your job because something closes down, that tells you that your interests are being affected, and everybody understands that. So it is, Madam Speaker, an important piece of legislation. It is one that generates the technical stuff of it. Nobody can dispute that. I don't know what particular coding is set out in the international agreements and so forth. Nor do I particularly care. What is important is, Madam Speaker, is that we understand that we are in a position in the international community that whatever coding is used, whatever descriptions are used, that we all fall in line and we are not at a disadvantage. I understand that this legislation is intended to do that, and therefore, Madam Speaker, we support it. But then how it originates in CARICOM? How do we explain it to people outside, to my constituents, the people in the country with whom we speak, as to why this is relevant to them? How this affects whatever you produce or intend to produce? How does that yearning get expressed in material things that we do, in relationships, whether they are as dry and cut and dry as they are in trade relations, or at a higher level, whether it's in institution buildings like UWI, or in the ones that generate the most emotions, West Indies cricket. Madam Speaker, I do believe that we have to be honest with ourselves, and maybe this is not entirely the place, but nowadays everything is broadcast all over. But we have to be honest with ourselves when we speak of these institutions, and here we talk in CARICOM, and we are asked to do things that we are to accept on faith, are beneficial, that we are to proceed, Madam Speaker, in a way as to suggest that these matters are to be dealt with at a certain level, when in fact they are intended to affect people where they produce, as the Honourable Member for West Kingstown spoke of, the Honourable Member for Central Kingstown. That is where the rubber meets the road, where it affects people in the opportunities that they have to trade, to produce, to form relationships across the region, rather than always be competing against one small entity against the other. How do we make our way in this world, Madam Speaker, when we don't make the rules? In fact, we barely shape them. And we are buffeted back and forth by every current, every wind that blows in the economic system. We are a small, open economy. I mean, you heard the early economists and thinkers that have led us down this path. Dimas, to Arthur Lewis. Madam Speaker, we know of the vulnerabilities of our small open economies. Most of us don't have any natural resources except the talent, the skill, and the hopes and dreams of our people. We now have to, having recognized that, put all that we can. We perhaps need it more than some of the larger countries, into ensuring that these institutions really are connected to the people. That people understand that they really mean something to their livelihoods. That when debates and discussions are held, whether it's in Nassau or in someplace else in the Caribbean, that their well-being is at stake as well. When you understand it at that level, it's easier to build on the other emotional stuff, because you know that's something that affects you, your livelihood, whether you can make a living or not, your opportunities to advance economically. That is something everybody understands. That's your personal interest. And you have that as a foundation you can build a lot more on. Madam Speaker, it is with a sense of frustration, quite honestly, that I speak on this subject matter, but not one that leads me to despair. I believe that there is tremendous potential in the work that is being done, in the harmonization of trade, the opportunities for various institutions within CARICOM to become more active and beneficial. Prime Minister talked about the CARICOM Development Fund. How many people know that that helped to finance the airport? Or might be helping to finance a hotel here that the government is building? What other institutions are there within CARICOM, the broader CARICOM, that can be developed to create more opportunities for our people and for our countries, especially for the so-called lesser developed countries in the region? It can't be just a matter of sitting down and perfecting the legislation with respect to trade. We have to have something to trade. What are we doing to ensure domestically and at a regional level that a country like ours, we also have something to trade? The Honourable Member Central Kingstown, I endorse everything he said. When he spoke about the limits of import substitution industrialization, that model, when is the incubation period over? Because there are costs and there are benefits. But somebody, some part of the institution, I'm talking of CARICOM, must be analyzing this at a macro level to see where the cost-benefit shifts from one of benefit to cost, and to know when to move on to a new model. And finally, Madam Speaker, well, I just want to, this is a clarification from the Minister, but I think I may know the answer. Maybe it's just a word that he used that he didn't intend. He had said something that the legislation or the increase in rates, as they were suggested by COTED, the suggestion is more than a suggestion, isn't it? I mean, if you sign on, this is something that you are, yes, it's pretty much, it's a decision that we have taken, and our obligations mean that we must carry them out. Right. So then people will understand that sometimes when you have a rate goes up and it costs you more in something, this comes as part of our involvement within this larger institution. And that as much as your condensed milk price might go up, or you might not be able to afford your favorite brand, that you have to say, well, this is somehow good for you. In the big picture, it is beneficial to all of us. And how do they understand that? How do we build that kind of relationship, that kind of understanding amongst our people, so that they know that it's more than just one little piece here, one item there, and so forth. That comes from education. I recall when the CSME was being promoted, there were billboards. There was one down in the harbor in Port Elizabeth for years that stayed there until it was faded, and it looked as though somebody had forgotten it there. And there were other posters, billboards around the country promoting the CSME. And that was it. I don't even recall there was one seminar, one lecture, one public meeting, one town hall meeting, bipartisan or otherwise, or bringing people in to explain what this is about, what are the realities affecting its implementation, the likelihood of it succeeding, meaning that it grows, and the obstacles otherwise. And what are some of the trade-offs, the things that you might benefit from, the things you might lose? Let me say, Madam Speaker, I am fundamentally committed to the economic and political integration in the region. This is something that I believe will benefit our peoples, but I am not somebody who is starry-eyed about it. To think that I have relatives in Trinidad and I have some relatives in BG or Guyana now it is, and that is enough to bring us together. It requires effort, it requires work domestically to get those economic things, the links that bind us and connect us inextricably, and then all the other stuff is built upon that, because people can see that it benefits them. The piece of legislation before us is intended to do that, and I want people to understand that. And look through the record of the Parliament and you'll see that we have a track record of supporting such regional legislation. But I want to feel, Madam Speaker, that we are part of something that is alive and growing, and not just having an episodic kind of involvement, which means when it comes to Parliament, that we are aware of a particular issue and we support it. This piece of legislation, as important as it is, has no particular explanation as to why it is necessary until the minister comes to Parliament and explains it. The objects and reasons nowadays are, I think they're being produced. You know, they're being influenced perhaps by the tendency towards brevity that you get in social media, because it doesn't provide much information. But a piece of legislation, they should come with a full page cover saying this is what this is, this is what this bill is, this is where it originates, this is what it's intended to do, so that we can, as an opposition, or people out there who are commenting on it in social media or on the radio, have an understanding of what's at stake. And I want to urge the new Attorney General to adopt that as a practice, especially when it comes to these types of legislation that you know are not controversial, but are in their nature very specialized, and have a more complex origin because they are regional or sub-regional in nature. To provide a better explanation, maybe a cover sheet, because a lot of our bills don't go through select committee, where you have an opportunity to ask these questions before you come to the debate in the parliament. And for us to be properly apprised of it, to engage in a meaningful debate, especially one where we are expected to support, then I believe that that is a practice that will benefit this honorable House. It certainly will benefit us here, and I believe it will benefit the people of this country because they will have much more informed debate of such legislation, or presentation of them, generally speaking, because people outside of this parliament would also be able to engage in it because that cover sheet gives them a summary of it. Madam Speaker, I know that there are other bills that are similar of nature that will come up in Parliament and today, and I may expand on one or two of the themes that I have mentioned here, but I'll wait and see what that debate entails. But we in this honorable House, we understand we have no objection to the legislation, and I trust that our comments are taken in the spirit intended, which is to provide further information, insights, and to broaden the scope of the discussion on this very important piece of legislation. I hope we have more debates of this kind in this Parliament. I'm much obliged.
For the debate. For the debate, I recognize the Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, honorable members. I'm looking up because I believe I sit under one of the tributaries of the the River Parliament, and I'm hoping that it doesn't bless me, and more importantly, my electronics. In my presentation, it should please you to know, Madam Speaker, that the temporary Parliament, although it won't be ready for our budget debate, is progressing well. And I was there over the weekend, and the contractors are in the process of installing the roof, which I suspect will be more reliable than the roof under which we now operate. Madam Speaker, I thank all honorable members for their contribution to what we've all agreed is a very important debate, and I trusted honorable members to broaden the debate beyond what I felt I was constrained to do as Minister of Finance, because I believe my job was to present the bill, and if I had strayed into some of the areas during my own presentation, I believe that I would have made it a more difficult presentation, because I'd be talking about more things, and it's a fairly complex piece of legislation. And I believed and I knew that other members would bring in matters like integration, the CSME, entrepreneurship, the import substitution industrialization model, the efficacy, like I said, the tributary is behind me. So I ask everyone to watch their electronics as we proceed. I remember when we were told when the Honorable Prime Minister said we were going to upgrade this Parliament building, somebody suggested on the opposition that it was wasted money and that all we needed were a few extra tables and chairs. But now we are seeing what we had been pointing out for a while, that this building is in need of serious repair. And that is the reason why the temporary Parliament building and indeed the permanent Parliament facility is being created, because the building is as we see it. In any event, Madam Speaker, honorable members, I wanted to, without detaining us too far, because I like when we have unanimity, and I appreciate when the debate is, for want of a better word, high-minded, that we're discussing issues of real importance. And I don't want to take too much time to respond to, as we all do, engage from time to time in this or that polemical accent to our debate. But I do want to mention a few things and follow up on a few points that were made, while sincerely thanking everyone for their contribution. There are some wires here. I don't know if these wires are of an electrical nature, but I am worried for my own safety at this point. Madam Speaker, I begin, if I may, with a quotation from a recent court case. The case being that of a decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice, which, as we should know, operates in its original jurisdiction, interpreting disputes that relate to the operation of the single market and economy. It's unfortunate tangentially that all of our declarations of support for integration and regionalism have thus far failed to extend to unanimous support for the establishment of the Caribbean Court of Justice, because that was a matter that was presented to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and opposed by some of the people who are claiming to be unbridled regionalists at this point. But I don't want to digress, Madam Speaker. There was a recent case this year, and I read a lot of cases in the CCJ related to litigation about the application of the CET and extra-regional goods and goods produced within the region. There was a recent case between Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago tends to be one of the litigants in most of these cases because of the nature of Trinidad and Tobago as an economic and manufacturing hub. And Belize sued Trinidad and Tobago before the CCJ related to sugar. And Belize's allegation was that Trinidad and Tobago was purchasing sugar from Honduras and Guatemala in violation of without applying the external tariff that should have been applied to Honduran and Guatemalan sugar. Right, there was no waiver. There was no waiver. And Belize was saying that these countries were dumping sugar in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago was buying it at a knockdown rate, and that disadvantaged the sugar industry in Belize. And so they sued in the CCJ. That's not the issue. The issue is the declarations that were made by the court. And with your permission, Madam Speaker, I'll just read 3 or 4 paragraphs from the decision, which I think further illuminate not only the importance of the CET, the Common External Tariff, but also an important point that follows up on something that the Honourable Member for Central Kingstown made. And I have to read the preambular comments before I get to the point that the Caribbean Court of Justice made. So I'm quoting now, Madam Speaker. The court has had reason to affirm repeatedly the importance of the obligation on member states to impose and maintain the common external tariff on the importation of extra-regional goods. The court considers it necessary to repeat these injunctions. CARICOM is primarily a regional economic integration arrangement and a customs territory, and the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas is a regional trade agreement within the meaning of the World Trade Organization. As a regional trade agreement, a regional trade agreement defines the parameters of a regional economic bloc or customs territory by listing 1, member states included in the customs territory, 2, conditions for membership, and 3, economic benefits of membership. Regional trade agreements are by nature discriminatory in that the member states enjoy a more favorable market access condition than non-members. Member states in a regional trade agreement may enter the regional market with less or zero restrictions as opposed to non-members who may face high tariffs. Intra-regional production and distribution are thereby prioritized over similar foreign-based production and distribution. The CARICOM Common External Tariff is a fundamental pillar in the establishment of the CSME, whereby the Caribbean community would achieve harmonization around a common rate or common regime of rates. The primary purpose of this Common External Tariff was to encourage and promote the production of goods within CARICOM. It was one of a range of measures identified by the member states as necessary in order to strengthen the productive sector and accelerate the process towards making their exports internationally competitive. The Common External Tariff is a defining characteristic of the emerging economic union and single economy among member states of the community. Substantially the same duties and other regulations of commerce should be applied by each of the members of the union to the trade of territories not included in the union. It goes on to talk about the various articles of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the role of COTED, and so on. And this is the point I wanted to get to to build on a point by the Honourable Member for Central Kingstown. The Common External Tariff does not, and they're talking about Belize in this point, but it applies generally. The Common External Tariff does not guarantee producers of sugar in Belize an assured market. It does not guarantee an assured market to the producers of sugar in Belize. But those producers are entitled to the protection of the market that the tariff was intended to provide. So we have to remember at all times that whatever we're doing here does not prevent anybody from buying anything from any other source. You can buy whatever you're buying from wherever you're buying it from. But what we're doing here is trying to set up a system, an architecture that both protects goods produced within the CARICOM region and levels the playing field between goods produced overseas and goods that are being produced locally. And it's an important point because I don't want anybody to go away thinking that we're in this treaty and the treaty making you buy something from somebody else and issues that the Honourable Member had raised related to quality and these things, that it was forcing substandard products or undesirable products on people. That's not the case. And I know that the Honourable Member wasn't suggesting that, but I'm just pointing out that you can buy what you want from where you want. Exactly. But there is There will be a cost involved in making the choice if you prefer a particular brand. I remember there was a time here where the only ketchup you could get here was, when I was a little boy, was Grace tomato ketchup. They had a little ad and everything. And there was another brand I preferred. I was a big ketchup eater. But it was what it was. The retailer could get Heinz or Hunt's from somewhere else, but the cost would have been significantly more expensive than if you got the Grace tomato ketchup. And these are similar things now, but in this day and age, there are more options to buy from more sources. Like members of the opposition said, I forget which one. People barely leave the house these days. You can order something on Amazon, it show up on Amerijet, they clear it by Roddy Dowers, just to name one example, and it's in the house within a week. But of course, there are tariffs involved in those choices. The Honourable Member for Central Kingston pointed out, when I was talking about we and us and the like, that what we're talking about here are businesses and the private sector. And I agree with that. And if in any way I suggested that I was talking about the state and not talking about businesses, I apologize for that. Because I also remember speaking about the private sector having to be aware that these changes mean things, and that if something is now cheaper from another source, the private sector entity should try to acquire that product from that other source. And this document of the revised common external tariff goes product by product and lists the rate of duty, excise for each and every product as you go. And I encourage members of the importing class of the private sector and the exporting class to pay attention to this document. And I've asked that the Printry produce this document at volume so that people can take a look at it and understand what it means for the products that they are buying and what it means for the products that they plan to export. Because very often it's only when it comes in at the port, people say, well, how come I have to pay 20% for this and it's only 15% for that and 40% for the other thing? Take a look at the book. And it's very, very important, Madam Speaker, honorable members, for us to continue to educate and encourage and cajole members of our private sector to be aware of opportunities and take advantage of opportunities. The Prime Minister made a fundamental point that is important, that the majority of our trade is in services, not in goods. 20% of our trade in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is in goods, or export trade. But there are opportunities for more trade. I think that's indisputable. And there are opportunities for members of the private sector who have good products to educate themselves and take advantage of opportunities that exist. The St. Vincent and the Grenadines has 110,000 consumers. The OECS is approaching 800,000 consumers. So before you reach CARICOM, before you reach the United States or the European Union, there are opportunities in this single market and economy that we could do a better job. And the we here is the private sector that I'm talking about, to do a better job taking advantage of. There's a product that we receive, Madam Speaker, in this honorable house. I won't say the name of the product, but we all enjoy it while we're here. And I remember, as Minister of Trade, visiting the producers of this product and saying, you have a good product, but you need to think about selling it in the OECS and selling it in CARICOM, high quality product. But there was, I'll say, reluctance to bother with that level of expansion and the various challenges, and they listed a lot of challenges and so on. Bother. And it is only when competing products began arriving on our shores that I was contacted again and asked to protect them against the product that was arriving on our shores on the basis that the product is of a lesser quality and so on and so forth. But I said then, they are doing what I was encouraging you to do, to expand beyond your borders. Because other people, other entities in St. Lucia, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Dominica, will take advantage of the opportunities provided by the single market. And we have to be ready to take advantage of those opportunities. And too often, I've had Invest SVG call entities and say, even entities, the Honorable Member mentioned going to the expo, which was an excellent expo with some really high quality products, to talk to them about growing and expanding. And sometimes, this is again goes to the culture of entrepreneurial activity. Sometimes there's a little bit of a fear to take the leap, to really, it's not that the resources aren't there, it's not that the support isn't there, but sometimes there's some people who want to have a cottage industry. It's manageable, they can control it. It's them and their brother, their sister, and their tanty, and they have it, they're operating it on a small scale, and the risks are greater, obviously, when you try to expand. And that's something we have to work on. That's not something that can solve itself overnight, and we have to be led and inspired by good entrepreneurs. And in that respect, I want to really, for multiple reasons of friendship and just loss, but in this case for example and entrepreneurship and inspiration, really bemoan the loss of Dwight Hillocks at Tusty Water, because this was somebody who understood what entrepreneurial activity meant and understood how to market a product within the country and beyond the shores of the country. And I really thought that wonderful things could have happened there had he had the opportunity to develop some of his other ideas. We have, Madam Speaker, other agreements beyond the region that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was talking about, lack of knowledge of CARICOM and the like. Very often I engage private sector entities and ask them what they know about the European Union Economic Partnership Agreement and the opportunities that may be there. And usually you get a blank stare. Before citizenship by investment, there was another CBI called the Caribbean Basin Initiative. And that initiative, if memory serves, last year, the United States imported $5.1 billion US from the Caribbean under that initiative. Now, a great amount of that was energy from Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. But there are over 50,000 Haitians directly employed producing apparel that would not exist but for this initiative, and manufactured goods in Barbados and seafood products in the Bahamas that take advantage of the opportunities inherent in these agreements. You have to be able to take advantage of what is there. And this goes, I'm dancing around the point made by the Honourable Member for Central Kingstown. The state has a role, and all the states in this integration movement have a role in trying to establish or negotiate the optimal conditions for business to thrive. But businesses have to take advantage of the opportunities. And obviously communicate, discuss the challenges and all the rest of it. And the Honourable Member for West Kingston was talking about some of the challenges. But entrepreneurs must be entrepreneurial. It's very important. And that is the difference between an entrepreneur and the state. And we have to recognize that. There are other areas, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry to be dancing around like this, but I just want to touch a few points before we wrap up. I remember a conversation that I was lucky enough to not participate in, but witness between the heads of government of CARICOM at the time and the then President of the United States, Barack Obama. It was in Jamaica, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Prime Minister raised with President Obama the issue of cannabis and what the United States is doing and what it planned to do about legalizing or decriminalizing, or what its idea was relating to cannabis, because we had a nascent sector. We were just discussing the legal framework at the time. And there was a very, 2015, there was a very spirited back and forth between the Prime Minister and President Obama. President Obama made this point. He said, you don't want us legalizing ganja too soon, because the minute it is available at McDonald's and the gas station, you're in problems. Because Mac ganja, Mac weed is what he called it. Mac weed will dominate the market at a level of production, at a quantity, at a quantum and a price that we will have the same problem we've had with every other agricultural product. So we have to deal with value added, and we have to deal with branding and these issues. And the United States set up the most ingenious violation of World Trade Organization rules probably in history when it comes to ganja. They were creating a product within their country, state by state, but not putting a tariff on it if you try to send it in, banning it entirely and making it a crime to import. Imagine if that was tomatoes, where St. Vincent and the Grenadines says it's a crime to bring tomatoes into St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We'll lock you up if you bring it in, but we will grow it in our country. And they developed expertise in their country in cannabis production. And now you hear President Biden talking about further relaxing and maybe even doing something at the federal level, which will, again, impact what we sell and how we sell and the issue of niche markets and the like that have been raised already. The Prime Minister the Honorable Prime Minister has repeatedly discussed the need to develop in St. Vincent and the Grenadines a modern, competitive, post-colonial economy that is at once regional, well, national, regional, and global. And I'm glad you've been listening to the Honorable Prime Minister. But the point is that it deals with the points that were raised. And in the evolution of our economy, from time to time, there will be dislocations and adaptations, Madam Speaker. There were dislocations when the preferential treatment for banana ended. It's not a smooth transition from one product or one economic pillar to another. And we are in the process of further deepening our relationship and our reliance on tourism. We're in the process of doubling our room stock. It is impossible to think that you can double your room stock in 3 years and not have the issues that the Prime Minister was talking about of hiring and training additional people. Because if you had them trained beforehand, you would have had a surplus. And so we are at a point now where we are growing and expanding in anticipation of the growth that's talking about. There was talk, Madam Speaker, honorable members, derisive talk about people talking about we don't have cement exports and masons. Our masons are excellent. Undoubtedly, our masons are experts. But has anybody gone to the site of the Sandals construction to see how they are building their hotel block? It is a manner of construction that we have never practiced in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Never. What they are doing, they're not putting down a string and running it across and putting the blocks one by one underneath the string to make sure it's level and then putting mortar on top and running another raw blocks. They are building a mold. They're building a mold of the room, a hollow mold. I'm not saying it's difficult to learn. I'm saying it is something we have never done. So the idea that you need expertise, if it's not difficult to learn, that means somebody had to teach it. So they're building a hollow mold of the rooms, placing the plumbing and electrical within the hollow mold. It's a hollow shape of a room, and pouring the concrete into that mold and building. That has not been done in this country. That has not been done in the way it's being done. I'm telling you. And I'm not saying it's complicated. I'm saying that the expertise does not exist at the moment, and the expertise has to be learned. So that is why they have brought in people who are teaching Vincentians. When you go there, you see Vincentians learning how to do this. And those Vincentians are also being taught at the site of the Holiday Inn Express, where they're being taught by Dominicans, not Dominicans, Dominicans who were taught in this technique when the same contractor was building a facility in Dominica. This is how you develop. This is how you learn new things. You are taught and you learn and you develop expertise. That's how it works. And similarly, we're in a situation where, as the Prime Minister said, 1,000 young people are about to be working at Clay Harbour. We have a labor force in this country of, at tops, 50,000 people. That means that Clay Harbour will be employing 2% of the labor force of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And when you think about young people, they'll be employing about 6% of the young people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Young, working age people. The Minister of Tourism led an initiative where close to 1,000 people went to the cruise industry. And then you had Sandals take now 350 people overseas to train them, young people, including young chefs. So there has been, in the last 2 years, well, I stand corrected. Clay Harbour is now celebrating its 3rd anniversary. So in the last 3 years, you have had new employers in the form of Clay Harbour, in the form of Sandals, which has taken hundreds already and is employing hundreds more locally, in the form of the cruise industry, who have absorbed multiple young people who work in the hospitality space. And there is a growing demand, not only from new hotels that have been built, but hotels that have yet to come on stream, to hire more people in these fields. So naturally, there has to be an increase in training at this point. I don't know that this is a controversial point, that there naturally has to be an increase in training. And that is one of the reasons why the Honorable Prime Minister has taken under his wing the ministry responsible for this type of training. And you'll hear the initiatives that we have coming and the initiatives that are already on the way. Over 2,000 people in the last 2 years, 2,000 people have gotten CVQs in this country. People don't talk about these things. 22, I say over 2,000, but 2,200. People don't talk about these things. The Honorable Member for West Kingston was saying, yes, we have these excellent masons, but they're not qualified. Over 200 masons, well, I don't know if it's all masons, masons and plumbers, have been qualified and received CVQs in the last 2 years. Yes, plus the NVQs. So the work is going on, but we are in the midst of a shift. And when you're in the midst of a shift, there will be dislocations here and there. The job of the state is to manage them and to provide the skills that the market is demanding. And that is what we're doing. That is precisely what we're doing. This particular piece of legislation as the Honorable Leader of the Opposition said, as everybody has said, is required if we are to be responsible members of the organization to which we belong. It is not the solution to the challenges and questions that have been raised, but it was a very important, it provided an important impetus to have those discussions. And I think those are discussions that we should continue to have, related to entrepreneurship, related to business development, related to the strength of our commitment to integration. And the Honorable, the former leader of the New Democratic Party, Sir James, who was recognized by the member for West Kingstown, was an unabashed supporter of integration. And I didn't think that was a matter, I never thought that was a matter on which there was divergence between the two parties until they voted against the Caribbean Court of Justice. That was when I realized there were differences. But this particular piece of legislation is a foundational aspect, a cornerstone of one of the most important pillars of the single market and economy. We must, as small states, commit ourselves to these arrangements, to any arrangement that makes us larger. Our vulnerability primarily is size. The way that you build resilience to small size is to make yourself bigger. We can't grow our borders physically. We can't grow our population overnight. But through integration arrangements, single economy, free movement, single markets, we make ourselves larger and more resilient and more influential, and hopefully provide more opportunities to the people of not only our countries, but the people of our region to thrive and grow and develop. So I, again, thank each and everyone who contributed. I think that the concerns raised were all valid. I agreed, I found myself in agreement with the majority of the concerns and issues raised on both sides of this Honorable House. And, pardon me? Coming of age, I could detain myself in other things, but I'm talking in the broad arcs. I'm talking about the broad arcs here. And therefore, in the spirit of the unanimity and the agreement and the support for this particular piece of legislation, and hopefully the legislation to come, I beg to move that this Honorable House convene itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. I'm obliged.
Clause 2, that Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 3, that Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Aye. That the schedule stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 1, that Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Aye. Honorable Minister.
I beg to move that the committee rise, the House resume, and the presiding member report to this Honorable House.
Honorable members, the question is that the committee rise and the presiding member reports to the Honorable House. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I have the honor to report that a bill for an act to amend the Excise Tax Act, Chapter 430, has passed the committee stage without amendment.
Madam Speaker, honorable members, I beg to move that a bill for an act to amend the Excise Tax Act, Chapter 430, be read a third time by title and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that a bill for an act to amend the Excise Tax Act, Chapter 430, be read a third time by title and passed. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
Excise Tax Amendment Act 2022. Item number 5, Custom Duties Amendment Bill 2022.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, it's now 1:10. I think this is an appropriate time for us to take the luncheon suspension, and we'll return with that particular bill. Beg to move accordingly that this Honorable House do stand suspended until 3:10 for the luncheon period.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand suspended until 3:10 today. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion say no. Ayes have it. The ayes have it.